Years have passed since Mom left, but the house still whispers her name in every corner. Lavender lingers, and so does the ache we can't escape. The house smelled of lavender and regret. Even years after Mom was gone, the scent clung to the floral wallpaper, a constant, ghostly reminder of what we'd lost. At 4, Emily hadn't fully grasped death, only the gaping hole it left in our lives, a void Dad tried to fill with bedtime stories and extra hugs. But I saw it in his eyes, the lingering sadness that never quite faded, a silent conversation he had with Mom's empty chair. The house was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a repository of memories, a tangible link to a past that was slipping away. Grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe had poured their lives into this place, their love woven into the creaking floorboards and the sun-drenched windowsills. Now, it echoed with a silence that was almost deafening. It was my house, and it was also my prison. I felt trapped inside of it as if I was not moving forward in time. Turning 14 felt less like a milestone and more like a prelude to a disaster. Dad, usually predictable and steady, became jittery, his smiles forced. That evening, when he adjusted his tie, a nervous tick I knew all too well, my stomach twisted. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the vast living room. "Emily," he began, his voice strained. "I want you to meet someone special." My heart pounded. Someone special? What did that even mean? Before I could voice my fears, the front door creaked open, and Jennifer walked in, a whirlwind of blonde hair and designer perfume. She was tall, confident, radiating an energy that felt foreign and invasive. She was a stranger who was about to steal my home. Behind her stood 2 teenagers. Brandon, glued to his phone, radiating a detached indifference, and Ashley, whose eyes held a cold, calculated glint. It wasn't an introduction. It was an invasion. "These are my kids," Jennifer announced, her voice too bright, too eager. "Brandon's in college, and Ashley is 16. Brandon didn't even glance at me, lost in the digital world of his phone. Ashley, however, stared me down with a smirk that sent a chill down my spine. It was a warning, a declaration of war. Later that evening, while Dad and Jennifer exchanged polite smiles and awkward small talk, Ashley cornered me in the kitchen, her voice a low hiss. "Just because our parents are dating doesn't mean we're sisters," she said, crossing her arms. "We don't have to be friends either. Let's just stay out of each other's way, okay?" I was too stunned to respond. The world as I knew it was shifting beneath my feet, and I had no idea how to stop it. 6 months passed in a blur of wedding plans, furniture rearrangements, and the gradual erasure of Mom's presence. Brandon took over the guest room, transforming it into a gaming sanctuary, while Ashley claimed the study, turning it into a shrine to her burgeoning social media presence. Jennifer's belongings multiplied like weeds, choking the life out of the house. Mom's photos, the small trinkets she'd collected over the years, were boxed up and banished to the attic, replaced with Jennifer's bland, impersonal decorations. I felt betrayed. The bathroom became a battleground, a constant competition for mirror space and shower time. I started waking up an hour earlier just to get a moment of peace before the chaos began. But I didn't complain. Not really. Dad seemed happy. Genuinely happy. He hummed while making breakfast, came home early for family dinners, and smiled with a lightness I hadn't seen since Mom died. His happiness was a fragile thing, and I didn't want to shatter it. Then came the promotion. Regional Sales Director, Dad announced at dinner, beaming. Jennifer's eyes sparkled with ambition. "Oh honey, that's amazing," she exclaimed. "We should renovate the kitchen, maybe get a new car." My focus narrowed on one phrase. Extensive travel. Dad would be gone. A lot. The reality of those words hit me a week later when Dad left on his first business trip. The second his car disappeared down the street, Jennifer's warm smile vanished, replaced by a steely glare. "Emily," she said sharply, "we need to set some ground rules." Her ground rules became a never-ending list of chores and restrictions. No study groups. No volleyball practice. "Someone needs to help with dinner," Jennifer said flatly, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Every day after school, I rushed home to scrub floors, clean windows, and cook, while Ashley lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone, giggling at TikTok videos. Brandon was a ghost, only materializing long enough to leave dirty dishes in the sink. One night, while scrubbing a particularly stubborn pot, I snapped. "Why doesn't Ashley ever do any of this?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. Jennifer's head snapped up from her magazine. Her eyes narrowed. "Ashley is focusing on college applications. She doesn't have time for chores," she said dismissively. I glanced over at Ashley, mid-TikTok dance, twirling with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Really? She looks pretty busy," I said sarcastically. Jennifer's voice dropped, cold and sharp. Emily, I won't tolerate disrespect. I clenched my jaw, biting back the words that threatened to spill out. What was the point? Dad was gone, and Jennifer ruled the house like a tyrant. The worst part was the act she put on whenever Dad called. Oh honey, she'd sigh dramatically. You have no idea how hard it's been managing the house, taking care of everything on my own. And Dad? He'd fall for it every time, showering her with gifts, designer handbags, perfume, jewelry. You're amazing, he'd say. I don't know what we'd do without you. I'd stand there in silence, my hands raw from scrubbing floors, my homework untouched, watching the charade unfold, feeling invisible, irrelevant. And every time I caught Ashley smirking at me behind her phone, I knew I was alone. The house was no longer a home. It was a stage, and I was just a prop in Jennifer's performance. I had to find a way to rewrite my role, to reclaim my own narrative. Senior year. The air hung heavy with the anticipation of college applications, graduation parties, and the promise of a future beyond the suffocating walls of this house. But for me, senior year was just another year of chores, resentment, and feeling like an outsider in my own life. Then came the bomb. The rent demand. $500 a month. The words hung in the air, thick with malice. I'm still in high school, I protested, incredulous. Jennifer shrugged, her eyes cold. We can't afford freeloaders. Brandon and Ashley snickered, reveling in my discomfort. So Brandon, who plays video games all day, doesn't pay? Ashley, who spends all day on TikTok, doesn't pay? But I do, I challenged. Jennifer's smile didn't falter. My kids are getting established. You're a child, leeching off our good graces. I could no longer recognize the house. I had been so foolish to let her in. The kitchen, the bathroom, my mother's lavender wallpaper, all of it was gone now, replaced with harsh modern colors. A strange calm settled over me, a cold, calculating clarity. The resentment that had been simmering inside me finally boiled over, hardening into a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. Well, I won't be paying rent, I stated, my voice firm. Jennifer's expression hardened, her facade crumbling. Oh, you will, she exclaimed. This is my house, my rules. I met her gaze, unwavering. No, it's my house, I corrected. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Jennifer blinked, then laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. That's ridiculous, she scoffed. I didn't flinch. My grandma Rose and Grandpa Joe left it to me before they passed. It's legally mine, I declared. The color drained from Jennifer's face. She stammered. You're lying. That's a lie. But her eyes betrayed her. There had always been an undercurrent of fear in them, a flicker of insecurity that I hadn't understood until now. She fumbled for her phone, her hand shaking. We'll see about that. She dialed Dad's number, putting him on speaker. The line rang twice before he answered, his voice groggy. Jennifer? What's going on? He asked, his tone laced with irritation. Jennifer's voice turned sharp, almost desperate. Emily's claiming the house is hers. That's not true, right? A long pause. A pause that felt like an eternity. A pause filled with guilt and regret. Then Dad sighed heavily. Actually, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's true. The blood drained from Jennifer's face. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. Brandon and Ashley sat frozen, their expressions a mixture of confusion and shock. Jennifer hung up abruptly, slamming the phone onto the table so hard I thought it might crack. She turned to me, her eyes dark with a mixture of rage and panic. Well, she said, forcing a tight smile. That was a misunderstanding. You don't need to pay rent, Emily. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, unblinking, letting the weight of the truth settle in the air. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, knowing that this wasn't over. Jennifer wasn't the type to back down gracefully. She would fight, scheme, manipulate, anything to maintain her control. And sure enough, as I listened through the paper-thin walls, I heard Jennifer whispering to Dad on the phone, her voice low and venomous. Honey, you need to do something. She can't stay here, she hissed. She's becoming a problem. My stomach clenched. Dad hesitated. Jennifer, it's her house, he reminded her, his voice weary. Jennifer's voice dropped to a low, syrupy tone, the same one she used when she wanted something. I know, honey, but she doesn't belong here anymore. She's ruining everything. We need to convince her to go away for college. Out of state. Get her out of the house. She's 18 now. It's time for her to move on. There was a pause, then Dad muttered, Maybe you're right. I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. They wanted me gone. My own father wanted me gone. The man who was supposed to protect me, to love me unconditionally, was willing to abandon me for the sake of a woman who had only brought chaos and resentment into our lives. The next morning, Jennifer acted as if nothing had happened. She poured herself coffee, chatted with Brandon and Ashley, all smiles and forced cheeriness. But I saw through the charade. She was plotting, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I knew I couldn't trust anyone. I had to protect myself, to fight for my own future. Then, one night, I decided to do something that I'd only ever dreamt of before. I opened the locked cabinet and went through my mother's old photo albums. I found a picture of her and me when I was a baby. She looked so full of life, so happy. I decided that I could not live this lie, and so I ran away. Dad and Jennifer found me the next day, exhausted and starving. I refused to look at Jennifer. All I could do was focus on my dad, my real dad, not the man she had warped into a monster. Dad's hands reached out. "Don't do this, pumpkin. This is your home." "No, Dad. This is her home. I can't live here anymore, not with her." After that, there was a tense peace. My father tried his best to keep the peace. He seemed to finally understand, to see what Jennifer had done to our family, but it was too little, too late. She was a parasite, and I was just beginning to find that out. The next morning, at breakfast, Jennifer sat, smug, waiting for the explosion. I was the one who triggered it. "Starting next month," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Everyone pays rent. $500 each." I stared straight at Brandon and Ashley, who were visibly shocked by this statement. I had to make a power move. I had to take control, and if my father wouldn't back me up, then I would have to leave the house. That would be the only way. That would be the only way to make sure that her claws wouldn't strangle my future. Jennifer froze mid-bite. Brandon, half awake, dropped his phone into his cereal with a splash. Ashley's spoon clattered against the table. "Excuse me?" Jennifer's voice was sharp, her smile now completely gone. I smiled back, sweet and unapologetic. "We're all adults, right? Seems fair?" Jennifer's face darkened. "Family doesn't charge family rent." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, you said the opposite yesterday." She slammed her coffee cup down so hard the liquid spilled onto the table. "That was different. I was teaching you responsibility." I let out a dry laugh. "That's rich, coming from someone living rent-free in my house." Brandon, ever the golden boy, shot up from his seat, knocking over his chair in the process. "Listen here." "No, you listen," I cut him off, standing up as well. "You've been out of college for 2 years and still don't have a job. I've been buying groceries with my own money. Maybe it's time you learned responsibility." I turned to Ashley, who was still sitting there frozen. "When was the last time you even did your own laundry?" Jennifer's voice shook with rage. "You're just a bitter little girl, jealous of my kids." I met her glare with steel in my eyes. "No, Jennifer, I'm finally standing up for myself." Her chair screeched as she shot up from the table. "Brandon, Ashley, pack your things. We're leaving." They didn't hesitate. For once, they had no words, no sarcastic comments, no smug glances. An hour later, I stood in the doorway, watching as they stormed out, suitcases in hand. Jennifer's face was twisted in fury, but beneath it, I saw something else. Fear. She hadn't expected this, neither had I. But it was a new beginning. The house felt peaceful for the first time in years. I could breathe. I walked through the now quiet rooms, my fingers trailing along the furniture, no longer feeling like a stranger in my own home. The peace didn't last. As the sun began to set, my phone buzzed. "Dad." I hesitated before answering. "What the hell did you do?" His voice was cold, angrier than I had ever heard it. "Jennifer said you kicked them out. How could you be so cruel?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Cruel? That's rich, coming from someone who was planning to push me out of my own home." Silence, then a slow, measured breath. "What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Dad. I heard you last night. I heard everything Jennifer told you to get rid of me, and you agreed." The line went dead silent. I could almost hear his thoughts racing. Then, a quiet "Emily, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I snapped. "You chose her over me. You always do." Another long pause, then his voice hardened. "You're tearing this family apart. Jennifer is devastated. She's threatening to leave unless you apologize." Something inside me snapped. "Then let her leave. You can't just do this. Jennifer is my wife." "You're right, I can. I'm making a decision for myself. You want Jennifer? That's fine. She wants your money. You can live in a hellhole, so long as you are happy. I hung up. I had done what I could. All that remained was to hope that in that moment of solitude, my father would finally understand. Graduation came and went. Jennifer, Dad, Brandon, and Ashley never showed up. My best friend Brittany's family took me in, hugged me tight, and celebrated me. They made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't disposable. My best friend Brittany's mom, her sweet voice crackling with warmth, gave me a photo album. I knew I would never forget that day. Thank you, I whispered. I'm so glad that our friendship wasn't some big joke. Days later, I sorted through my college acceptance letters. I'd gotten into several schools, but one stood out. Northwestern University, 1,000 miles away. It was time to go. The prospect of leaving filled me with equal excitement and dread. Would I be able to escape? Would I ever be able to make friends? Before leaving, I took one last look at the photo album, a book that brought me to my knees. My mother, always with me, always watching over my heart. I was packing for college when I saw Dad's car pull in. My stomach clenched, but I kept folding my clothes. The front door opened, and heavy footsteps echoed through the house. I turned to see them standing there, Dad, Jennifer, Brandon, and Ashley, all dressed like they were heading to a business meeting. Their expressions were cold, distant. We've come to resolve this, Dad said stiffly, with Jennifer nodding behind him. I'm willing to forgive your behavior. We can move back in, but you need to apologize and drop this rent nonsense. I looked at them, Jennifer's smug smile, Brandon and Ashley sneering. Years of being treated like a maid flashed through my mind. The nights spent scrubbing floors while they watched TV. The way Jennifer would complain about how hard managing the house was while I did all the work. The way Dad had chosen them over me time and time again. I straightened. No, I said. Dad's face hardened. If you can't be part of this family. I'm done, I interrupted. I'm leaving, and I'm disowning you. I exhaled, my heart steady. That's your choice, Dad. You've been choosing them over me for years. Why stop now? Jennifer gasped, hand on her chest, like I had physically struck her. You've always been jealous of my children. I felt a cold smile tug at my lips. Jealous? Number. But I finally see you all for who you really are, and I don't want any part of it. Dad's jaw clenched. You'll regret this. I won't, I said. Jennifer scoffed. Come on, honey, we're done here. Let's leave her to her pathetic little life. Brandon and Ashley smirked as they turned to go. But I didn't care anymore. As the front door slammed behind them, the house felt lighter, emptier, but for the first time, that felt like a good thing. I held up my phone. One more word, and I'm calling the police for harassment. Silence. For the first time, they had nothing to say. Jennifer's face twisted with fury, but she wasn't in control anymore. Brandon and Ashley exchanged glances, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Dad, he just stood there, shoulders slumped, like a man who finally realized he'd lost something he could never get back. They packed and left without another word. It's been 3 months. I'm writing this from my dorm at Northwestern University, 1,000 miles away, finally free. The house, my house, is rented out to a young family. I visited once before I left for college, just to make sure everything was in order. The walls had fresh paint, the floors were polished, and the place no longer carried the weight of old memories. I could hear a child laughing from the backyard, and for the first time in years, the house felt like a home again. The rent covers my college expenses, so I don't have to worry about money. I have a scholarship too, but knowing I have financial security is a comfort I never thought I'd have. Dad, he's still working, living in a rented apartment, the last I heard. Jennifer got her kitchen renovation, just not in my house. Brandon finally got a job but still lives with Dad, and Ashley dropped out of college to start a fashion blog. They've moved on, and so have I. Sometimes late at night, I scroll through old photos. One always catches my eye. Me and Dad on the front porch when I was 4, him holding me up so I could ring the doorbell. He was smiling, a real, warm smile, the kind of smile that made me feel safe. I don't recognize that man anymore. Maybe one day he'll regret his choices. Maybe he'll see me as his daughter, not a burden. Maybe he'll realize that by choosing Jennifer, he lost me forever. Or maybe he won't. Either way, I'm done waiting. Letting go isn't weakness, it's strength, and for the first time in my life, I'm finally strong enough to move forward. The past doesn't define me. I do. During my second year of college, I met an older gentleman. He was in his late 60s. His name was Mr. Johnson, and he had just moved into the neighborhood. I'm not sure why, but my heart was immediately drawn to him. One day as I was struggling to carry my books back from school, he ran over to me, his eyes twinkling. "Here, sweetheart, let me give you a hand with that." "Oh, that's not necessary. I can manage," I smiled. "Nonsense." He reached over. "I can see that those must weigh at least 30 pounds. "You're probably right," I laughed. And so, a strange relationship began. I would visit his house every weekend to help with groceries, cleaning, and gardening, all while listening to his old stories from his youth. He was a kind and interesting man, and he always had a word of wisdom for any and all situations. The only problem was he knew all about my family, my mother, and my grandfather's family. "You know, your mother was one of the sweetest women I had ever met," he said, and for the first time I felt a twinge in my heart. Do you really think so?" "My father barely talks about her," I asked. "I know," he said, a solemn look crossing his face. "Your father was too broken to continue on the life he had. In his mind, he was doing the right thing. But, I guess we can never know for sure what he was thinking, can we?" The letter arrived on my 22nd birthday. It was postmarked from my hometown, a place I hadn't visited in years. The handwriting was unfamiliar, shaky, and filled with a sense of urgency. My heart pounded in my chest as I tore open the envelope, fearing what I might find inside. The letter was from Mrs. Davis, a kind woman who had lived in my neighborhood back when I was a little girl. Her neat handwriting filled with memories I'd almost forgotten. As I read, a wave of emotion washed over me, a mixture of sadness, longing, and a deep sense of loss. It was a window into a past that had been erased, a reminder of the love and joy that I had once known. "My dearest Emily," the letter began, "I hope this finds you well, wherever you may be. I know it has been many years since we last spoke, but I felt compelled to reach out to you after all this time. Your father is dead. His heart was too broken to continue living without your mother. I was asked to give this to you. He told me it was important that you got it on your birthday." Inside the envelope was another, smaller envelope. My heart was pounding now. Tears streamed down my face as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, Dad's handwriting on it. "My dearest Emily," it read, "if you're reading this, then I am already gone. I know I have made many mistakes in my life, mistakes that I will never be able to undo. But please know that I always loved you, more than words can say. I was weak, Emily. I allowed myself to be manipulated by Jennifer. I was so desperate to find happiness again after your mother's death that I lost sight of what was truly important, you." He ended it with a heartfelt blessing. "I know in my heart of hearts that you are strong enough to survive, and that you don't need me in your life to move forward." There was nothing that I could say. After a few days of grieving, I went home. As I was walking along the old road to home, I saw a woman. She was blonde, and she had her own young child with her. As I got closer, my heart leaped in my chest. It was Jennifer. "Jennifer!" I screamed. She whipped around. "I don't think I know you," she smirked, but I could tell in her eyes that she recognized me. "You're evil," I said. "You're the reason my family crumbled. What are you even doing here?" "You're a child," she said. "You don't understand. You're the reason your father is dead." Something inside me snapped. I reached out and slapped her right across the face. Her baby began to cry, and I ran, sobbing, to my childhood home. This was where my father's old apartment had been. As soon as I went through the door, I felt my heart grow light. My father was gone, but in this house, he could finally rest, and I would inherit the future that he wanted. Years later, I stood on the porch of the lavender-scented house, watching my own children play in the yard. It was a warm, sunny day, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter. I had made it. I had built a life for myself, a life filled with love, happiness, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The house was no longer a reminder of loss and pain, but a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the enduring power of love. It was my inheritance, a legacy that I would pass on to my children, a story of strength, survival, and the courage to choose your own destiny, even when the odds are stacked against you. I had finally found my way home.